everyone, and welcome to week 6 of Unit 2. Please remember that we are working now on the response essay, the response assignment, and you are going to be responding to either the Twitter trap or a math problem for Pi Day in your response essay. Those are the two articles, just those two, that you're responding to with this assignment. So our main objectives for this week are to understand how to respond to arguments using argumentative strategies, practicing how to enter the conversation in an existing argument, and researching resources and citation. Your assignments for this week are to watch/read the supplementary instructor videos of PowerPoint as usual. In your Top Hat book, please read the following sections: research information, incorporating sources, drafting, and organizing your response essay. So in these sections, which I'll also cover in the PowerPoint, you'll be learning how to incorporate your sources, so further learning how to enter the conversation, as well as learning the basic structure of how to organize your response essay, in addition to learning how to organize a multi-sided argument. And we'll cover a multi-sided argument more in depth in Unit 3, so Unit 2 introduces us to that kind of organization in an essay. And you have 2 assignments due this week. So the first one is due Wednesday, that is the incorporating sources assignment. The second assignment is due Friday, that is developing your response ideas and logos. So this week, I will be reviewing very briefly both of your assignments with you, just because they're a little bit tricky and require a bit more detail. So for your incorporating sources assignment, and the information you see on here will also be on the assignment itself, we'll be going over the STAR acronym. So for the Unit 2 essay, the response essay, as it says in the assignment objectives, you must include a minimum, so at least 2 outside resources in your assignment. So these resources can either be an article similar to the one you evaluated in your Unit 1 assignment, so like the Twitter trap or a math problem for Pi Day. It can be an op-ed, it can be a journal article or a peer-reviewed article. It can be a set of statistics, a survey, as long as it's a credible resource. And that is the point of the activity, incorporating sources, which you'll be doing for this week's assignment. So the STAR acronym is a special criteria that helps us evaluate the overall persuasiveness of our evidence. And STAR stands for sufficiency, typicality, accuracy, and relevance. So basically what you'll be doing in your assignment this week is using STAR to help you analyze each source that you find. And you can choose to use more than 2 sources in your essay, and I do highly encourage that. We just say to use a minimum of 2 sources, because without that minimum, your essay is not going to be that credible or that well supported for your neutral audience, or to convince that neutral target audience that you're trying to persuade to believe your claim. So as we see here, in sufficiency, what do you want to look for when you're considering whether your evidence is sufficient? You're considering, is there enough evidence? What examples might you choose from your article, your chosen source, to correlate with your thesis? Is there too little evidence or enough evidence to support your claim in your chosen source? Typicality. Is the chosen evidence representative and typical? So is the evidence in your source, in your article, typical rather than representing extreme circumstances? Is this evidence biased, or again, rather typical, representative of the norm? Accuracy. Is the evidence accurate and up to date? So here you want to think Kairos. Evidence can't be used ethically unless it's accurate and up to date. Is it timely? So if you can find a date on when the evidence or source you're using was published, that's going to be very beneficial. So again, pay attention to that date, pay attention to the language that's used in your argument. Is it out of date? Again, timeliness. That's what matters when you're debating the accuracy of the source you chose. And then finally, relevance. Is the evidence relevant to your main claim? Does the evidence you intend to use actually relate to your main claim, or is it off base? So now we're reviewing developing your response ideas and logos activity. So this activity is meant to be after you have researched what is out there surrounding the argument or surrounding the claim that you chose. So remember, the three kinds of claims you can choose to respond to are an agree, disagree, or agree and disagree claim. So this activity is basically setting up the logos or the logic of your own argument. What kind of evidence are you going to use? What's the structure and organization of your essay going to look like based on the claim you chose and the kind of sources you chose to incorporate? So after you have read through all that information, read through the sources and evidence available out there for you, you are going to revise the logos of your essay. You're going to revise your thesis, revise thinking about it, how you might go about writing your essay. So to review some of the questions that you're going to respond to, what is your revised thesis claim going to be? So your claim is your main thesis, your own argument that you're making about the issue that came up in the source argument. You need to clarify how you position yourself with the author of the argument. So again, make sure in your thesis, we can easily tell whether or not you agree, disagree, or agree and disagree with certain points made in the main article's original argument. So either the Twitter trap or a math problem for Pi Day. So if you're unsure how to write your thesis claim, refer back to that believing, doubting activity because it provides you a good template to start out with. What are some key reasons that support your claim? So again, sufficient evidence. You need to sufficiently develop your claim, your thesis. You need to provide support. So again, this is why I encourage you to potentially use more than a minimum of 2 key sources and use those to support your argument. What is at least one moment in which you will rebut the author of the argument or concede to their point? So I will discuss rebuttal and concession strategies in the next few slides. However, what you'll want to do in your argument at least once is consider one point that the argument might make in opposition to your own argument that has some credibility to it, and you want to acknowledge the credibility of their argument. However, after you have done that and have conceded to their view and their strength of the credibility on the argument, you want to pivot back to your own argument, so rebut their argument, and further strengthen your argument with evidence and support. So that is called concession or rebuttal, and that's a form of multi-sided argumentative strategy. What alternative perspectives will you need to consider and why? What evidence will you need to support your claim and reason? So these two go hand in hand. So this is why I encourage you again to kind of look beyond 2 resources just to get it over with. You want to do more than that so that you have a good idea of what is out there on the topic. You are further developing and elaborating when you enter the conversation because you yourself are furthering this argument in your own words. On this slide, I have included kinds of evidence that you might want to consider when looking for possible types of research. So there are a few kinds that are ideal for this type of essay and a few that you might not want to pursue. So we have data from personal experience. This one, for example, is not ideal for this essay because we aren't necessarily going to consider it the most credible resource because it's not an outside authoritative resource. We then have data from observation or field research, data from interviews, questionnaires, surveys, library or internet research. So again, those articles, op-eds, you can include those. Testimony. So what is testimony? That is when, if in an article you find a quote from a professional or an authority on the subject, such as a CEO of a main or renowned technology company, that is called testimony, and you can include that in your as evidence in your essay. We have statistical data, hypothetical examples, cases, and scenarios, and we have reasoned sequence of ideas. So basically, this is just describing how you format your essay and describing the organization of your general evidence. Now we are going to go into the best ways of how to incorporate or cite sources in your essay, so within sentence-to-sentence citation. And this is referred to as the source sandwich in your Top Hat textbook. So there are 3 to 4 things you want to do when citing within text, so in text citations in an essay. You want to introduce the author, article, or source, include the quote or evidence, explain the quote, and if there is a page number, so in a journal or a book, sometimes there's not page numbers on articles, and that's okay. You want to include the page number at the end in parentheses. So we have an example here below. We have, in addition, Stephanie Williams states in her essay, Dream Child, that as a recurring theme in Alice in Wonderland, is Alice's difficulty in separating fiction from reality. It remains paramount that distinctions are made between the literary and medical dream child, as the merger of dream states within waking consciousness in Wonderland greatly impacted Victorian interpretations of the child mind. So as we see here, we have the author. So the author is introduced. We also have the writer introducing the article itself. And then we have the quote that the student writer pulled from. So the evidence included, that's number 2. And we have explanation. So what they did, what the student did here, they split their explanation and framed the quote. So I use different colors for that. Their explanation went before the quote, and they also included it after the quote. And then finally, they also included their page number and the article it came from at the end. Direct versus indirect attribution. So attribution is what we say when we are attributing or giving credit to the author's original ideas and work. Otherwise, it is considered plagiarism. And you should be incorporating both direct and indirect attribution in your own essays. So what's the difference between direct and indirect attribution? So as we see here, direct attribution is when you directly state in a sentence the author's name and or their article. However, in indirect attribution, you do not introduce the author each time or the article, and you only state where the quote you pulled from or the evidence you pulled from, the example, came from in parentheses at the end with the page number. So here's an example of how direct and indirect attribution may be used in an essay. So we have Jonathan Swift, author of A Modest Proposal, states, I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work. Swift 26. So I've color-coded the difference between direct and indirect attribution. So as we see here, direct attribution occurs when the writer explicitly or directly states where they received their information. They got it from Jonathan Swift. author of a modest proposal. So the first time you introduce or use a source, an article in your essay, you should always use direct attribution. After you have done that, you don't have to continue using direct attribution or introducing the source. You can just refer to them by their last name. Therefore, you can use indirect attribution afterwards. So as we see here, indirect attribution is when the writer cites a source at the end of the quotation. So if you ever wanted to, again, just refer to this same article again, what article is this? A modest proposal, you could just say, Swift wrote, or Swift stated that XYZ, and then you would write the page number with the article title in parentheses at the end, and that's a form of indirect attribution. And both of those are correct forms of citing sources and do not count as plagiarism. And as you see on the slide, these are some examples of templates for how to include citations or attribution or attributive tags in your essay. These are also in the textbook itself if you want to reference that instead with more explanation. So we have X states, or the author states according to the author, and then you would include the quote. Similarly, we have templates for explaining quotations because, as I wrote previously, one of the steps is to explain a quotation also. So you can think of the source sandwich as we described it in Unit 2. That's similar to the 3X example that I used in Unit 1, which is whenever you include an example or in a paragraph, you need a topic sentence, an example, and an explanation of that example. You want to do the same thing with quotations or examples. You want to explain them. And then finally this week, I want to start to introduce you to multi-sided argumentative strategies. Many of you have started to realize how these work within the Unit 1 essay. So multi-sided argumentative strategies are often described as the author considering alternative or opposing viewpoints. However, in Unit 2, you are going to be considering alternative and opposing viewpoints. You're going to be identifying whether authors themselves consider those. And then your main objective is to, in your essay, consider those alternative views and include a concession and rebuttal at least once to help your essay become as multi-sided as possible. Making your essay a multi-sided one strengthens your argument. So as we wrote here, or as I wrote here, you started to consider how to use multi-sided strategies with the believing dotting game when you considered both sides of the argument. With concession and rebuttal, you acknowledge the strength of an alternative or opposing argument. This is called concession, conceding that they have a relatively strong claim. Then you pivot back to your viewpoint on the issue, explaining how your view is the slightly stronger argument in this case, and you provide evidence to support your claim. This is called the rebuttal. So this is where I suggest, again, doing further research more than the required minimum 2 sources that are necessary for the Unit 2 essay. I highly suggest you find a third source at least on the opposing view, so that if you need to concede and rebut your opposing views or target audience's opinion, you can rebut it successfully.